met on Twitter who are here today. And I think I can speak on behalf of Sabrina and myself to say thanks very much for inviting us and for joining us today. So we thought we'd take a minute and I'm going to ask Sabrina to share a little bit about herself, and I'll do the same. And then I know many of you are sharing a bit about yourselves in the chat, but after we do a bit of an introduction, we're going to launch a couple of polls so we can learn a bit more about you as well. So Sabrina, over to you.
Thanks, Dawn. And thanks everyone for having us in to talk about this paper. It's a really special paper, so we're thrilled to be here. My name is Sabrina, and I live with ME, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, and several comorbidities. I got involved in patient partnership work probably about 7 years ago, and since then have been kind of working on multiple projects in the post-infectious illness community, so both with long COVID and ME. I'm a co-founder with the ICAN-CME Research Network, which is our ME research network here in Canada, and it's still fairly new. It's in its fourth year, but we're really excited to have accomplished that together, patients and researchers coming together. And I live in Nova Scotia with my family, so I'm delighted to be with you guys this morning.
Thanks, Sabrina. And hi, everyone. My name is Dawn Richards. I live, work, and play on Treaty 13 territory. I'm really privileged and try my best to learn from those who have lived on these lands for many thousands of years before I arrived here. I am a basic scientist by training. I had the label of patient given to me almost 20 years ago when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and I've since been diagnosed with osteoarthritis as well. And those diagnoses fundamentally changed not only my life, but my career as well. So I started off as an analytical chemist. I'm really far from being an analytical chemist now. Now I work with people and organizations to try my best to help them work with each other, to work with patient partners, to hopefully make their research more meaningful and relevant, and hopefully result in better outcomes than what would happen before. So Sadia, if I can ask you to launch the first poll, we'd love to know a bit more about who we're talking to. And so we're going to ask you to share the perspective that you bring to the discussion. I think it may be set up so you can only select one of those options. And I apologize, it's hard to slice and dice yourself, but if you can share the perspective that you feel you bring there. And I think we've got another question as well that is just below that first question. You might have to scroll down. And that is what your experience is with patient engagement and research. And so maybe you have no clue what that is. Maybe you have a bit of experience, and maybe you're going to wrestle the mic from Sabrina and myself, and you would like to present instead. So let's just take a moment. I think we've got most people participating actually at this point, which is awesome. So I will end the poll, and or Sadia, if you could end the poll so that we could see the results, that would be awesome. Okay, so it looks like we've got a good mix of people who consider themselves patient partners. We've got a few trainees and researchers and clinicians. Yay, you. That's awesome. We've got people who facilitate patient engagement, and we've got others, and hopefully you're putting that in the chat so we know a bit more about you. And then it looks like many of you want to do our talk for us, which is awesome. You've got lots of experience, so hopefully we'll have a really good discussion after our presentation. We've got someone who's clearly a lot newer to things, and then we've got a good mix of you that have some experience. So thanks all of you for participating in the little polls there. That's really awesome. Okay. So I know that you've been given the paper beforehand. and really just a little bit about it and how it came about. So Sabrina and I are authors on it, along with 4 other patient partners, one of whom is on the call cheerleading for us. So thank you, Sue. Vina is another patient partner in Toronto. Lori is a patient partner from Ottawa, and Jeffrey Smith is also here in Toronto. We all identify as patient partners, though we all live other lives besides our experiences within the healthcare system. And really, it's in the paper, but Sabrina and I started chatting about this, I think it was close to 2 years ago, based on some experiences that she'd had recently. And we just had a really therapeutic conversation for probably an hour or so about this. And we thought, well, like, we can't be the only ones experiencing this. And how might we actually use these experiences to hopefully create some good out there? So we were really all motivated to bring some light to the experiences we've had and that we know others have had. We are privileged enough to feel safe to admit that we've had these things happen to us. And we know that not everyone feels that safety or privilege. And so we almost felt a duty to sharing this. And then really, we want people to take this the right way, basically. We're not trying to come down on anyone. We're not trying to point fingers. But we do want to collectively, as a community, bring about some positive change. And I think much of what we have reflected on in the paper is good people trying to do things and having the right motivations, but not executing well or maybe thoughtfully. And we'd really like to change those into opportunities for growth and discussion. So I think as 6 individuals who are not, like, we're not academics, this isn't our job, we were really pleasantly surprised by the reception that our work has had. So we actually posted our original manuscript that we submitted to the paper when we submitted it for peer review. And that preprint itself was downloaded over 500 times and was viewed over 3,300 times. And now our paper to date has been accessed over 5,100 times. And for those of you data nerds who are interested in altmetric, it means it's shown up and it's been shared a lot on social media. So it's making the rounds, which is cool. And it's actually been cited in other peer-reviewed papers, which is also really cool. So I'm going to hand things over to Sabrina for this slide.
Thanks. So when we started talking, Dawn shared that it started with her and I having a conversation, and then we brought some really brilliant, wonderful people into that discussion with us, whose names you've seen. And again, Sue's on the call supporting. And we had some really interesting conversations. And after we talked at length, really, about some of the experiences we had and some of the good and some of the not so good, we categorized it under 4 statements or 4 categories. There would have been 10 different ways to organize this. This is just what we chose. So the 4 statements are patient partners as a check mark. This can also be defined as tokenism. Unconscious bias, so lived experiences. Unfortunately, lived experiences are not always viewed as true expertise. So sometimes we have to work a little bit harder to be at the table and to be heard. Lack of support to fully include the patient partners. So that's sometimes, again, good intentions, lots of willingness to do it, but just a lack of the supports or understanding of how to do that and how to execute. And then lack of recognizing the vulnerability of patient partners. I think a lot of researchers and maybe clinicians forget how traumatic our experiences can be with the healthcare system. So when we come into the research space with them, sometimes the same kinds of triggers are being hit and the same kinds of messages are being given. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. So we categorized it this way, and we're going to go into each one in a little bit more detail. Dawn, over to you.
Yep, thanks, Sabrina. So as Sabrina mentioned, we're going to go through each of the statements. I'm going to kind of tee things up and add on a bit more context to what Sabrina just went over in the table. And then Sabrina is going to put things into context for you and share some of the examples that we discuss in the paper. So the first statement, as Sabrina said, is patient partners as check marks. And so this is just classic tokenism, and not everyone knows what tokenism is. And so the way I think about it is when you've been invited to the party, but nobody talks to you at the party, and actually nobody at the party is really interested that you're there. So you're there, but are you really there, right? And this makes us feel like we're set up as an afterthought, right? That we're not really integral or important enough members of the team. And probably we feel like we've been picked to just say yes, to just go along with what's happening, and to maybe not raise our voices when we think that something isn't important or relevant. So Sabrina, would you like to put this into some examples as context for people?
Sure. So some of the things that we talked about as a team that we had seen happen or had happened to us. One example would be being invited to grant teams close to the deadline. So not really being able to influence much of that proposal or that process, not really being able to make decisions. And really any feedback you have at that point is kind of too late. So it can be a tricky spot for everyone. Because it's, it's not the right time to bring us in. The right time to bring us in ideally would be at the idea stage. Being dropped or ignored by a team or ghosted when difficult questions are asked. This has happened to, I think, quite a few of us in this space, where unfortunately asking difficult questions eventually just led to no discussion at all. And difficult questions are a way to learn, right? It's not meant to be anything more than just an opportunity to discuss. Meetings are often scheduled when they're convenient for everyone else except the patient partners. So many of us are living with debilitating illnesses, or we may be trying to juggle multiple things in our lives, and having that timing set to include us is really important, but it's a small detail that often gets missed. And then being involved in poorly run meetings with little consideration for the importance of introductions and relationship building, discussions, creating safe spaces, and exploring areas of disagreement. So my background was community development, so this stuff is really important to me. I think we really need to spend more time on the front end of working together, getting to know each other, and really being able to create those spaces that then lend themselves well to those difficult conversations and navigating the tough stuff together. But, often everybody's really busy and that stuff kind of gets missed in the beginning. So we're playing catch up for the whole project. So those are just a couple of examples under that one.
Thanks, Sabrina. Okay, if we go to the second statement, this is about unconscious bias towards patient partners. And I think it's important for us to recognize that really anybody, no matter their intentions, if they're not thinking carefully about their biases, may be bound to do this. And so, the thing here that we want to emphasize is experiencing these biases as part of research and healthcare teams just compound harm to us as patients. And important to note that, especially on, these are areas where we're often volunteering, or we may be compensated, but our motivations are quite different from the others on the team. And being part of teams where these biases are actually contributing to further medical trauma is, really not a great situation to be in. So Sabrina, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So we talked about some examples under this one, including inviting patient partners who mirror the team's demographics or who have the privilege and time to be engaged and do not require additional resources and supports. So that happens sometimes when people are really busy and they just want to bring somebody in who can fit into their really busy, rather than having the conversations and asking about accommodations, for example. I'm presenting from my bed today. That's an accommodation for me. It's an important one. And not everybody's comfortable with that. And it's okay to talk about that. But we need to be able to recognize that we need a broad spectrum of representation. And certainly as patients, we want a broad spectrum of representation. So that's part of the conversation back and forth that you can have right at the beginning of a project. Underestimating the capabilities and intellect of patient partners and failing to recognize that many of them have full lives, skills, experiences, and education to contribute. I think that often, we're kind of, everything that we did before is erased. Everything we know outside of being a patient is erased. And while our lived experience is incredibly important, incredibly valuable and valid, it's not all that we are. Many of us had careers or currently have careers, and we bring all of that knowledge. We are parents, we are community members, we bring a lot to the table, and we need to be able to be our full selves at the table. Racist and ableist language. So this is often on the bias side. It's stuff that people don't realize that they're saying or doing. I've never been in a room where anybody's intentionally doing that in a way that's direct and aggressive, but certainly microaggressions are something that still comes up pretty commonly in many rooms. And, gaslighting patient partners when they share the harm and the impact of those words, and when they take the time to educate you, which we're not required to do, but when we take the time to do that, it would be lovely if it could be heard and received. But often defenses go up quite quickly, and it's, it doesn't go very well. So it lends itself to patient partners not really wanting to have to talk about this stuff at all, and kind of shuts us down. And the mostly able-bodied and healthy team members not fully understanding patient perspectives, feedback, and ideas, given their differences and experiences. So we know that we bring something different to the table. We're excited about that. And we think that typically researchers are excited to have us at the table for that reason. But our perspectives are different. And sometimes it takes some extra time to navigate those as a team, as a group. And, it's not always easy to kind of be, especially if you're like one patient partner on a team, and you kind of always have to be the one putting your hand up and going, actually, I wouldn't say it that way. Ugh. Yeah, we wouldn't do that. Sorry, we shouldn't say it that way. It can be quite exhausting work to have to do that. And so it's really incumbent on the researchers and the clinicians that are part of those teams to do some of that unpacking and some of that work to look at how they've internalized ableism and some of the work that they need to do to, be good partners for us, because we're working really hard to be good partners for you. Over to you, Dawn.
Thanks, Sabrina. So on to our third statement, and this is about not fully supporting patient partners to be fully included in what you're doing. And so how this can feel for patient partners is that when you ask for supports, if they're not offered up front, you feel like you're putting the team out of their way, right? So you're asking for something that they haven't thought about, and like, oh, should I do this? Or am I going to be seen as difficult? Am I going to be seen as demanding? What if I'm seen as ungrateful, right? And so you're already different by virtue of the perspective that you bring and the label that you wear, being a patient partner. And then when you are deciding about finding the courage to speak up about something to help support you to be fully part of that team, you worry even more about how you're going to be seen. Sabrina?
Thanks. So some examples that we talked about here, we're expecting patient partners to work alongside senior academics without compensation commensurate with role expectations or support in understanding the complexities of working within an institution. So we're asked to be at the table and be a part of the team, and we want to be full partners. But sometimes if we're newer to patient partnership, we may not understand how an institution works or what steps are involved. So that's something that's really kind of scary and intimidating, honestly, when you're in your first couple of years of doing this. First of all, you're coming to the table and having to kind of raise your hand and ask a lot of questions. And second of all, here's another set of questions that you're having to talk about on top of the bias or the lived experience component. And you're afraid to scare the researchers away. You're afraid that maybe you're asking too many questions and you'll be seen as too problematic or too much work. And compensation is a really important piece of this. We are coming to the table and giving fully of ourselves. So compensation ideally would be offered from the beginning, and it should be offered by the research team. It shouldn't be something we have to ask for ideally, because that shows right away that there's a value component to the work that we're being asked to do. And also acknowledging that there are many people within our communities who cannot accept compensation because they may be receiving benefits, and that could put a big target on their back, but it should be offered nonetheless. There's sometimes lack of leadership support for meaningful inclusion, such as having team members understand patient partners' conditions and offering support that individuals may need to do the work. So for example, with CME, something that we do is we do orientation for new researchers and clinicians. And the reason that we do that is because we want them to understand our illness and our condition and how it may show up in the work that we're doing together. So for example, me presenting from bed, that's a very common thing that may come up, and let's normalize that. Let's talk about that. Let's not wait until they're kind of wondering what's going on. Let's normalize a space where we can have those conversations. And let the people who are the patient partners take the lead on that, support them, but like let them take the lead on explaining how they wish to be referred to and seen and understood. No time dedicated to building relationships. We talked about that one earlier, wanting to hit the ground running without really doing that pre-work, which is so important and so indicative of how the rest of the project will often go. And then sometimes we encounter terms of reference, codes of conducts, or policies that are rooted in ableism. And again, not intentional, but it's part of how society has taught us to think about disability and how we speak about it. It's all very internalized at this point for us. And unless you do the work to unpack that bias and the language that you're using and the way you think through these kinds of issues, you're bound to repeat it. So we really kind of encourage that conversation about ableism at pretty much every table where patient partners are there, because there's components of that. And again, it's so present in society, it comes up over and over. I just recently left a group actually because the code of conduct was so one-sided against patients and really kind of asking us not to speak about anything related to the illness topic. And it really kind of almost had a muzzling effect for the patient partners at the table. So for me, that was something I couldn't commit to because I wear many hats and they're all important. And one of them is as an advocate. And so I have to be able to do the advocacy work. And that doesn't mean I can't be a good patient partner, but it's certainly something where when it's illustrated to the researchers that there's an issue and it's not taken on board and we don't do anything about it, it can be tricky to sort of navigate moving forward because it kind of feels like we're not really seen right from the beginning in the policies. So I think it's worth having those conversations. It's worth listening to both sides and seeing if there can be some meeting in the middle. Over to you, Dawn.
Yep. And our last statement is about lack of recognizing the vulnerability of patient partners. And so here, this is where patient partners bring all of their experiences. And while it can be really uncomfortable for others at the table, sometimes those are very painful and traumatic. So they're just as uncomfortable for patient partners to share. I've been around tables where this kind of excuse of, well, we need to redo the work because people are being very emotional and they're not being objective. And that's not really fair to ask us to not be emotional about our lives, right? And to, remain objective about things. I would also push back. I'm trained as a researcher myself. Researchers are biased about their own areas of research too. So I don't think it's fair to have this we're objective, you're not kind of perspective. And it's also really important to know that being the only one sharing those really raw and personal experiences can be super alienating, especially if you don't feel like it's a safe space. And so, it's again not fair to be the only one on the team that's sharing something extremely personal when you can't get by someone's title or other people on the research team are not being able to share at least something a bit personal about themselves. So Sabrina?
Yeah, so for this one, I think this is one of the most important ones and one that certainly I've gotten a lot of feedback from people reading the paper, acknowledging that this isn't often something that we discuss and that it's so important. So some of the examples we had for this one were things like meetings and interactions facilitated without creating a safe space or via a trauma-informed lens. And a trauma-informed lens in this context means understanding what these individuals have been through. And you'll never understand it fully, and we understand that, but trying to make an effort to take the time to understand that. And sometimes research teams will do that by having us in to like share our story. But I don't just want to come in and lay my trauma on the floor over and over again and hope that everybody doesn't trip over it. Like, it has to be used for something good. So if I can tell my story and that helps us to build a connection where you understand a little bit of the trauma I've had to experience, and maybe you understand a little bit more why I'm so passionate about patient partnership and why I'm so passionate about helping my community, then that's great. But if we're just asking people to come in and kind of share one after the other their story, and there's no trauma-informed lens, there's no kind of space created for openness and discussion and safe questions, it can be just very kind of empty and surface. And I like to go deep. So I encourage you guys to think about how you can do that too. Dawn addressed the being told that patient partnership perspectives are biased and emotional. That's one that comes up a lot. And we often will hear researchers even talking about blocking quickly on Twitter because somebody said something or somebody questioned what they were doing. And, we just have to understand that these are our lives. And while we're super grateful for the researchers and clinicians in the space, for us, it is really personal and it is very emotional, and that's okay. It's okay. Let's just normalize that, it's okay for people to be multidimensional and have lots of feelings. We're all having a human experience. And if I met you in a different space, I would give you that opportunity to be your full self. And I just want the same when I'm in the room. A lack of recognition about how invested patient partners are in creating a better healthcare world came up quite a few times when we were talking as a group. There's such a lack of understanding about that investment, about what we put into it, about what we hope to get out of it, about how much, quite frankly, our lives are sort of riding on the research and everything is invested in it. I think often people just think of things as projects, like researchers and clinicians are like, this is one project, this is another. But for us, it's like, no, this might be my way out of bed. This might be my way to parent better. This is, everything to me. So I'm deeply invested in the success of the research. And obviously, I'm saying me, all of our patient partners, I haven't yet met a patient partner who isn't deeply invested in the work that they're doing, whether they're new or whether they've been here for a long time. There's a deep investment of their time, energy, and hope. And then another one was having a single patient partner or not a range of patient partners and their experiences on the team, which is very relevant in COVID and long COVID research, ME research as well. In long COVID and ME research, for example, we have a wide spectrum and presentation of what that can look like, that experience can look like. We have some people, for example, with long COVID having organ damage, but we also have some 50 to 60% who seem to go on to develop ME. And so, we need to have both sides of that equation represented in conversation. I tweeted this morning, but we're not an adjunct to that conversation. The ME piece is actually a very important, essential part of that conversation. And so we have a spectrum of severity as well. We have people who are on the milder end, and we have people who are so severe that they're laying in dark rooms all day. We need to be able to acknowledge these different variations on the experience when we're looking at the research and when we're thinking about the experience. So likewise, patient partnership should reflect that. And so we would love to see, for example, in our ME and long COVID research, we like to see 4, 5, 6 patients engaged so that we can really represent that full spectrum. So something to think about, if you just have the one person at the table, it's very hard on them. At least 2 to 4 would kind of be a good group to at least get started with. Dawn?
I'm going to punt it back to you,
yeah.
Sabrina. You're going to talk about the impact that this has on patient partners.
Thanks. So yeah, we talk a lot about in the paper the things that aren't working. And then we felt it was really important to talk a little bit about why any of it matters, really, because sure, the research isn't going to be as great if we're not there. And sure, we want a smooth experience for people, but it's really deeper than that. Some of the invisible impacts of, research projects not including patient partners effectively, some of the impacts can be mental and physical exhaustion. We can have worsened health. This is especially true for individuals like myself. We have an exertion-based illness, but it's true for everyone in patient partnership. They're giving the energy and the time that they have, and they're often having to move other things out of their lives to be able to do this work well. And there's a big commitment there. And so it's really important to understand that with that often will come worsened health because they're giving so much of themselves in so many different areas. Often as time goes on and when things aren't working, it'll encourage people to internalize that, and we'll start to question the worth of the engagement, maybe our own self-worth. We'll start to wonder if it's us or them because it's happening everywhere we are. And so is it us because we're the common denominator? And in reality, of course, it isn't. It's just the nature of a space that's trying to evolve to include us, really sometimes for the first time. And it takes a while to kind of get that right. And there's a real feeling of failure. and I can't explain this well enough. I can't put words to this enough. The amount of patient partners that I speak to who feel like they have failed their community or failed themselves, failed the research team when it doesn't go well, when it isn't smooth, when they've asked a lot of questions. Even if the questions were well received, they will leave meetings feeling like, ooh, I talked too much. I shouldn't have said that. There's a real impact on us. So, and especially for our communities are often our only real source of support. So we don't want to fail them. We want to represent well. We want to make sure we do our best job to increase research accountability, research safety, the right kinds of research being done. And so the impacts are really quite deep, but often invisible. And so if a researcher and a clinician aren't really looking for those kinds of impacts, they may not even notice that they're happening right under their nose. The burden is often on patient partners to educate the team on how to do engagement well. And with that comes a heavy responsibility, again, to represent the entire community of their illness, sometimes the entire community of patient partnership. And, we are often reminded through the process that we are at the bottom of the hierarchy. And while we may know that constantly happening over and over and over again to somebody like myself or Dawn, who've been in this for a long time, really takes a toll. So we do our best to try and warn new patient partners coming in that there's a process and that this is a new space and that we are kind of all learning this together. But I often think about, how many of them will still be left in 5-10 years to do this work. And we can't be burning through patient partners. They're incredibly important. You can go to the next one if you want. So, as we've talked about a couple of times, it's pretty personal for us. Our lives are depending on your research, the clinical care that you may be providing. The translation of research into clinical care is so vital and important. And we know that 17-year, translation, which is terrifying, I think, for any patient, because if you're working on a project, you're like, this is so great. I want this to happen like tomorrow for everybody else in my community. So it's very personal. We have a lot riding on it. And honestly, we can only deal with so much before it breaks us, our spirits and our desire to create change. We're only human and we're really sick and we're often being gaslit, ignored, or traumatized in the healthcare system. And so when we're doing this work, this is often for us the opportunity to channel some of that into something positive. That's us taking a negative and trying to do something with it. And not everybody can do that. And we honor those experiences. But for a lot of us, that is why we're involved in research. We're trying to take something negative and do something with it. And these situations will compound over time. So if in every room we're in, we're being encountered with the same issues and the same challenges, leading back to the 4 statements, it really does kind of take its toll over time. And eventually our fire will go out and it can't always be rekindled. So it is something we need to think about as a research community. It's a really important discussion about how we nurture and support our patient partners so that they can be with us for the long haul through all the work that we're doing, because they will be infinite amount of wisdom and knowledge and will be a real asset. So something for us to think about. And really part of the reason we wrote the paper is we really wanted to just call this out and say it out loud, normalize the discussion and make it safe for everybody to be able to talk about this more. Dawn?
Thanks, Sabrina. So we put some reflective questions in the paper, and Sabrina and I are happy for the remainder of the time together. If you'd like to respond to the reflective questions and that be part of our discussion, that's awesome. If you also want to ask other questions, we're totally good with that. We're happy to just go with the flow. But we did want to put out these reflective questions. And so I'll just read them. Basically, we want you to think about in your own work with patient engagement and research, how do you accept feedback from patient partners and how do you integrate that into your work? And how do you get back to them so that they know that that's actually been integrated into your work and it's changed the course of your work? Or how did it make you think differently? How can you ask more thoughtful questions of patient partners about their lived experiences? And I think part of this work is just being really thoughtful about how you're engaging a different group of people in your research. And so maybe you're not going to put out the same questions to them that you are to the rest of the research team. And that's appreciated, right? That somebody on the team's actually thought about how I can contribute to the team that might be different from the other people who are part of the team. How can you create safer and more inclusive spaces for real and meaningful discussions? And Sabrina talked about a lot of things, right? Like, okay, well, we got to get this grant in. And then when the first meeting happens, well, we got to get moving, right? And it's like, yeah, but like if we take 10 minutes to actually get to know each other a bit, is that going to wreck the entire timeline of the research project? Like, I don't think so, right? And so, I might hazard that just making a safer space is not only better for your patient partners, it might actually benefit the rest of your team to get to know each other as well as, actual people. And then how do you share your power and privilege with patient partners? And again, that's part of so we can collectively really move this field forward. So, people in academia and in healthcare, by virtue of inviting patient partners in, you're the ones holding the power. And so how can you share that? What does that look like? How can you have patient partners, be in charge of making specific decisions about certain things? Or how do you support them better so that they, feel like they have more power being part of the team? So we'll just put those out there. I'm going to take the slides down shortly, but I'll also copy those into the chat. And just before we forget, I'm also going to put up our information. I think Sabrina and I are both really open to continuing the discussion outside of today's hour that we have together. And so these are the different spaces and places you can find us. And I'll just end by thanking all of you and happy to go into questions now.